When did you hang up on someone begging for your help? I was 27 when my toddler drowned in my pool. The morning started normally. Baxter played by the pool steps while I folded laundry on the patio. Then out of nowhere, I tasted metal on my tongue and everything went black. I woke up from my seizure 3 minutes later to see Baxter floating face down. The paramedics worked on him for 40 minutes, but it was too late. He was gone. My mother-in-law didn't even bother whispering, "How could you stay married to the woman who killed your son?" I was thinking the same thing. But that night, David held me. "It wasn't your fault, my love." He stroked my hair while I sobbed. "We'll heal together. You couldn't control what happened." He planned everything. The funeral, the flowers. He made sure I ate and showered and defended me to his family. He held my hand at grief counseling and told everyone how much I loved our son. When I woke up screaming Baxter's name, he'd rock me like a child until the shaking stopped. He took 3 weeks off work just to make sure I was never alone with my thoughts. He made me breakfast in bed and covered the living room in rose petals. On the days I felt like I was drowning, he'd dress up in the silliest outfits we had just to make me laugh. On the days I wanted space, he'd leave the room, but not before giving me a red button that, when pressed, pinged a notification on his phone telling him to come in because I need a hug. He helped me more than I thought possible. But 2 weeks later, the cracks started to show. I was in the kitchen getting ready to leave for my work party when my husband asked if I could hoover our bedroom. "Honey, I have the work thing tonight," he scoffed. "Must be nice to celebrate while our son is in the ground." I tried to brush it off, but when I got home, I saw he'd moved Baxter's photos to face my side of the bed. I didn't even have the strength to turn them back around. Soon he was muttering things under his breath when he thought I couldn't hear, then louder. In just a few days, it had gotten to the point that he'd scream, "Baby killer," at me. Most of the time, it was for things as small as not drying the dishes enough. And whenever I confronted him, it was always the same excuse. "I never said that. You're imagining things." I woke up one morning to him screaming and clutching our son's backpack. The woman I married would have died before letting our baby drown. I started sleeping on the couch, getting up at 5 a.m. just to avoid him, and it was working. Until one morning, when I heard the toilet flush 5 times in a row. That's when I saw it. Him emptying my epilepsy pill bottles. Like it was nothing. "These didn't save him. They're clearly a waste of space," he mumbled without even looking at me. I just stood there, too exhausted to fight him, but I kept going to grief counseling, kept hoping he'd remember who we used to be. Then during our session that Tuesday, he looked the therapist dead in the eye and said, "I should have been home, but she insisted she could handle it." A complete lie. That's when I knew we could never be the same again. I left while he was at work, just grabbed my clothes and laptop. My sister Emma took me in without hesitation. She found me a therapist who specialized in trauma. It took months to stop believing I was a killer. My sister encouraged me to start volunteering with an organization that helped epileptic parents fight custody battles. The stories broke my heart. I helped a mom named Jessica prove she was stable enough for unsupervised visits. Her ex had used her epilepsy against her. Sounded familiar. Another dad got his twins back from foster care after I testified about seizure management. Within 2 years, I was running support groups. I'd helped dozens of families stay together. Even met a gentleman named Tom at a medical rights conference. His wife died during a seizure. He understood. We took things slow, but he never made me feel dangerous. 2 years of healing, of learning to trust again. We'd just finished dinner and were watching some stupid reality show when my phone started to ring. It was David crying his eyes out. His 4-year-old nephew Marcus had drowned at a family barbecue. David had been watching him at the pool but went inside for another beer. "It was just 5 minutes," he kept repeating. His brother was pressing charges. Negligent homicide. David wanted me to testify that these things happen, that parents can't watch every single second. The irony was suffocating. 20 minutes of crying and pleading. "Please, you know what this is like. Tell them it was an accident." I took a deep breath. He was right. I did know what it was like. "I'm sorry for your family's loss," I said. Beep. I hung up. Good riddance. Or so I thought. Because the next morning, I woke up to 39 voicemails and over 99 unread messages, all from David. The first one was apologetic. The second was angry. By the third, he was practically begging me to come over. My phone kept buzzing on the coffee table with new messages coming through every few minutes. I picked it up and stared at the screen showing those 39 voicemails, and the message count that just said 99 plus, because there were too many to display. My hand started shaking as another notification popped up while I was holding it. Emma came rushing in from the kitchen with a dish towel in her hand. "What's wrong?" I just turned the phone screen toward her and watched her face go pale. She sat down next to me and took the phone from my shaking hands. We spent that whole afternoon going through everything together. Emma grabbed her laptop and created a new folder on the desktop that she labeled evidence while I played the voicemails on speaker. The first few were him crying and saying he was sorry for calling me. Then they got angry with him yelling about how I owed him after everything he did for me. By voicemail 20, he was screaming that I was heartless. Emma took screenshots of every single text message. Some were desperate pleas about how he needed me to save him from prison. Others were vicious threats about what would happen if I didn't help. One said I'd regret abandoning him when he needed me most. Another called me the same names he used to scream at me after Baxter died. Emma typed notes about the timestamps and saved everything to multiple places, including a cloud backup. I tried to steady my breathing by counting to 10 over and over while she worked. That evening, after we finished documenting everything, I sat on the couch and all these memories came flooding back. I remembered David standing in our bathroom dumping my epilepsy pills down the toilet one by one. He'd claimed they were useless since they didn't save our son. I remembered him screaming "baby killer" at me for not folding the laundry right. I remembered waking up to Baxter's photos turned to face my side of the bed. And now this same man who tortured me for having a seizure wanted me to defend him for actually choosing to leave a child alone. The irony made me run to the bathroom where I threw up everything I'd eaten that day. Emma held my hair back and rubbed my shoulders. The next day, I had my regular therapy appointment and told my therapist everything that happened. She helped me create a safety plan that we wrote down step by step. First thing was blocking David's number on my phone, which she had me do right there in her office. Then we went through all my social media accounts and changed them to private. She showed me how to block him and his family members on every platform. We talked about varying my daily routines so I wouldn't be predictable. Instead of my usual coffee shop, I'd go to different ones. Instead of the same grocery store, I'd alternate between 3 different locations. She reminded me over and over that protecting myself wasn't selfish, and that I didn't owe David anything. It's necessary for your safety and healing, she kept saying. Day 3 brought a whole new nightmare when I woke up to dozens of notifications from friends. David had posted publicly on social media accusing me of abandoning him in his darkest hour. He wrote this long post about how I knew what it was like to lose a child to drowning, and how cruel I was for not helping him. His mother had shared it and added her own commentary about how I should show compassion since I know what it's like to be blamed for a child's death. She wrote that I was being vindictive and heartless. More of his family members kept sharing it and adding their own angry comments. People I hadn't talked to in years were messaging me asking if it was true. Emma helped me screenshot everything before reporting the posts for harassment. After another sleepless night where I kept checking the locks and jumping at every sound, I decided I had to file for a protective order. The thought of seeing David in court made my stomach turn, but I couldn't keep living in fear. Emma drove me to the courthouse that morning and held my hand the entire way. She stayed with me in the waiting room while I filled out the initial paperwork. The courthouse advocate was a kind woman who explained the whole process to me. She said I'd get a temporary order first if the judge approved it based on my statement. Then there would be a full hearing within a few weeks where both David and I would present evidence. She was honest about how difficult these cases could be when there was shared tragedy involved. Judges sometimes saw grief as an excuse for bad behavior, but she said the documentation Emma and I had gathered would help my case. She gave me forms to fill out and showed me where to write my statement. I spent the next 2 days writing my sworn statement at Emma's kitchen table. I detailed everything that happened after Baxter drowned. The photos being turned toward me, the baby killer screams, him dumping my medication down the toilet, the gaslighting when he'd deny saying things I just heard. I included dates and times when I could remember them. I'm curious about David's sudden shift from being so supportive to becoming cruel. That's quite a dramatic change in just 2 weeks. Something about the way he moved those photos to face her side of the bed feels calculated, not just grief-driven. Writing about Baxter's death and how David acted afterward felt like reopening a wound that never properly healed. My hand cramped from writing and I had to take breaks to cry. Emma brought me tea and snacks and sat with me when it got too hard. Including the recent harassment with all the voicemails and messages and social media posts filled 3 more pages. A delivery arrived at Emma's apartment on the 5th day. The delivery person handed Emma a bouquet of roses with a note attached. She read it out loud before I could stop her. David had written that he was sorry and just needed one conversation to explain everything. He said he loved me and knew I'd understand if we could just talk. Emma walked straight to the dumpster behind the building and threw the flowers in while I stood there fighting the guilt that tried to creep back in. Part of me felt bad for not helping him, even though I knew that was crazy. That evening, Tom came over and we had a difficult conversation about safety boundaries. He wanted to confront David, but I explained that would make things worse. We agreed he wouldn't try to intervene directly no matter how much he wanted to protect me. We also decided not to meet at predictable locations for a while. No more regular Tuesday dinners at the same restaurant. No more Saturday morning walks in the park. He struggled with feeling helpless but respected that I needed to handle this my way through the legal system. Filing day came 3 weeks later and my hands wouldn't stop shaking as I walked up the courthouse steps, carrying the thick manila folder with all my documentation. The clerk at the window took my paperwork and started stamping each page while I filled out the final forms with a pen that kept slipping in my sweaty grip. I signed my name 7 times across different documents and paid the filing fee with cash I'd withdrawn that morning to avoid leaving a credit card trail. The clerk handed me a case number and told me to wait in the hallway for the judge's initial review. I turned around from the window and froze because David's mother stood 20 feet away by the water fountain just staring at me with her arms crossed. She didn't move or speak, but her eyes followed me as I walked to the wooden bench against the wall. 2 security guards near the metal detector noticed her watching me, and one of them shifted position to stand between us while the other kept glancing over. She stayed there for another 10 minutes before finally walking toward the exit, and the guard followed her all the way to the door. That afternoon, the judge's clerk called me back into a small conference room where she explained the temporary order had been granted, and David would have to stay 500 feet away and stop all contact immediately. The sheriff would serve him the papers within 48 hours, and she warned me that's often when people get most angry, because it becomes real. I drove home taking 3 different routes and checking my mirrors constantly. 2 days later, my phone rang while I was at work, and the caller ID showed the district attorney's office. The prosecutor handling Marcus's drowning case told me David had listed me as a character witness for his defense, and she needed to inform me about the attempted contact violation. She said she'd already notified my attorney about this manipulation tactic, and added a note to both case files. Her voice sounded tired, like she'd dealt with this kind of thing too many times before. The next morning, my epilepsy clinic called to report someone had tried accessing my medical records using an old insurance authorization number from when David and I were married. The receptionist said their new security system had flagged it immediately and blocked access, but they wanted me to know about the breach attempt. I drove to the clinic that afternoon and filled out 4 different forms to file a formal complaint and add extra security passwords to my account. The office manager helped me set up a special alert system that would text me instantly if anyone tried to access my records again. I spent the rest of that day changing passwords at every medical provider I'd ever used and calling my insurance company to flag my account. 3 days later, a process server knocked on my door with a thick envelope from David's defense attorney requesting all my therapy notes related to Baxter's death for his criminal case. The subpoena claimed the records were essential to establishing a pattern of tragic accidents and understanding the psychological impact of child drowning incidents. My hands shook as I read through the legal language, trying to force me to turn over my most private thoughts about the worst day of my life. I called the legal aid office and they connected me with a lawyer who specialized in protecting therapy records. She met with me that afternoon and helped me file a motion to quash the subpoena based on therapist-patient privilege and irrelevance to David's criminal charges. She explained this was a common harassment tactic in these situations and warned me to expect more legal maneuvering designed to wear me down. The motion cost me $300 to file, but she said it was worth it to establish a pattern of harassment for the permanent order hearing. That weekend, I woke up to 17 text messages from friends sending me screenshots of a Facebook post David's mother had made. She'd uploaded a dozen old family photos from when Baxter was alive with a long caption about how mental illness and seizure disorders destroy families and leave innocent children vulnerable. She never used my name, but everyone knew who she meant, and the comment section was full of people offering their prayers for David during this difficult time. My face burned with humiliation as I read strangers discussing whether epileptics should be allowed to have children. I screenshot everything and forwarded it to my attorney, who added it to our evidence file. Tom held me while I cried that night, but we both knew there was nothing we could do about social media posts that didn't technically name me. The next Thursday at my support group for epileptic parents, someone I'd never seen before kept staring at me during the meeting. When we took a break, she approached and quietly asked if I was the person from the Facebook post she'd seen shared in a local moms group. My stomach dropped, but I decided to be honest with her and the group facilitator about what was happening. The facilitator immediately implemented new security measures, including checking IDs at the door and removing our meeting location from the public website. She also connected me with their legal advocate, who'd helped other members dealing with custody battles involving their epilepsy. The advocate spent 2 hours with me the following week preparing for the permanent order hearing by running through potential cross-examination questions. She taught me to answer only exactly what was asked without elaborating or defending myself, even when they brought up Baxter. We practiced staying calm when the opposing attorney would try to make me emotional by showing photos or reading old social media posts about my son. She explained they'd try to paint me as unstable or dangerous to make David look like a victim instead of a harasser. 3 days after that meeting with my lawyer, Emma's neighbor knocked on our door holding his phone. He showed us security camera footage from 2 nights ago with David's car creeping past the house at 2 a.m. My hands started shaking as I watched him slow down right in front of Emma's driveway before driving away. Emma grabbed my arm and said we needed to call the police right now. We drove to the station with the footage saved on a flash drive. The officer behind the desk took us seriously when I showed him the protective order paperwork. He made copies of everything and said they'd add extra patrols to Emma's street starting that night. He couldn't arrest David yet, but promised if they saw his car, they'd pull him over and give him a warning. On the drive home, Emma kept checking her mirrors like she expected to see David following us. That evening, Tom called to check on me after I texted him about the footage. He suggested I pack a bag and stay at his place for a while until things calmed down. I appreciated the offer, but told him I needed to stay where I was. Moving in with him would feel like running away, and I couldn't let David control my life like that. Tom sounded disappointed, but said he understood this was about me keeping my independence. The next morning, I had my regular therapy appointment. My therapist pulled out a whiteboard and drew 2 columns. In one, she wrote David's choice, and in the other, medical emergency. She had me list the facts about each drowning incident. David chose to leave Marcus alone to get a beer while I had a seizure I couldn't control. David was conscious and made a decision while I was unconscious from a medical condition. David had 5 minutes to change his mind and come back while I had no ability to help Baxter during my seizure. By the end of the session, I could see the difference clearly for the first time. David killed Marcus through his choice while I lost Baxter through a medical emergency. 2 completely different situations that he'd been trying to make seem the same. Later that week, the ADA called with an update about David's case. She said his lawyer was pushing for a plea deal of criminally negligent homicide with just probation and community service. No jail time at all. She wouldn't need my testimony anymore, which was a relief, but I felt angry that he'd face almost no consequences for what he did to Marcus. The ADA said these deals were common in drowning cases, and at least there'd be a conviction on his record. The next day, I got an unexpected call from David's brother. He was starting a memorial fund for pool safety in Marcus's name, and wondered if I'd share my perspective as someone who'd been through something similar. David's brother calling to ask for pool safety advice feels like asking a fire victim to sponsor a matchstick factory. The timing here is so bad it could win awards for worst family outreach attempt ever. I could hear the pain in his voice, and part of me wanted to help, but I knew I couldn't get pulled back into their family drama. I told him he should talk to the ADA about pool safety resources instead, and hung up before he could ask anything else. 2 days later, I was running my weekly support group for parents with epilepsy. We were going around the circle sharing updates when one mom started talking about her toddler's near drowning at a public pool last month. My chest got tight and I couldn't breathe. The room started spinning and I had to grip the table to stay upright. My co-facilitator noticed immediately and smoothly took over the discussion while I stepped outside. I sat on the steps doing my breathing exercises and counting backwards from 100 like my therapist taught me. It took 20 minutes before I could go back inside. After the meeting, my co-facilitator and I stayed late to talk about what happened. We decided to create a formal backup system for all our groups. We'd always have 2 trained facilitators at every meeting and a clear signal system if someone needed to step out. We typed up the new protocols that night and sent them to all our volunteers. The next week, we trained everyone on the new system. It actually made our whole program run better, because parents felt safer knowing we had multiple people who could help. I felt more confident too, knowing I had backup if I got triggered again. Things were going well until I got a call from my nonprofit's director asking me to come in for an urgent meeting. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint saying I was unstable and dangerous to vulnerable families. The timing wasn't random, and we all knew it had to be David trying to mess with my work. The board had to investigate, even though they suspected it was harassment. I spent the next 3 days gathering all my documentation. I printed out the police reports about David's stalking and copies of the protective order. I got a letter from my therapist about my treatment and stability. I collected evaluations from families I'd helped over the past 2 years. The board meeting was nerve-wracking, but they were supportive throughout. They said they knew this was retaliation, but they had to follow procedures. After reviewing everything, they cleared me completely, but suggested I keep a lower profile for a few weeks. They worried David might escalate if he saw me in the news or at public events. I agreed to step back from any media interviews and let other staff handle the upcoming fundraiser. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in the courthouse waiting room with my hands shaking, so bad I could barely hold my water bottle. Emma sat next to me checking her phone every 2 seconds while my lawyer went over my notes one more time. When they called my name, I walked into that courtroom and saw David sitting at the other table looking like he hadn't slept in days. His lawyer stood up right away and started asking me questions about our marriage, trying to make it seem like I was just being mean because of the divorce. I kept my answers short and stuck to the facts like my lawyer told me. I told him about the voicemails and the texts and the drive-by, and then I got to the part about the pills. The judge sat up straighter when I explained how I found David flushing my seizure medication down the toilet. She asked me directly if I believed my life was in danger without those medications. I told her yes, because seizures can kill people, and someone who would take away my medication already showed they didn't care if I lived or died. David's lawyer tried to say it was just grief, but the judge wasn't buying it. She asked more questions about the timeline, and I showed her my phone with all the screenshots and recordings I'd saved. After about an hour of testimony, the judge said she'd heard enough. She granted a 1-year protective order with no contact allowed, including through other people. David's face went white when she read the terms, and his lawyer whispered something in his ear. We left through different exits, but when Emma and I got to the parking garage, David's mom was waiting by my car. She started screaming that I was destroying their family, and that I killed her grandson, and now I was trying to ruin David too. Emma tried to get between us, but his mom kept coming closer, blocking my car door. Security showed up pretty fast when Emma hit the panic button on her keys, and they made his mom leave, but not before she spit at my feet. The next morning, I went to the clinic for my regular checkup, and they had a whole new system for my records. They made me show my ID and create a password that I had to say out loud before they'd even pull up my file. The receptionist explained they'd gotten some weird calls asking about my medical history, so they put extra security on my account. It felt good knowing they were taking it seriously. Meanwhile, the nonprofit board sent me an email saying they'd finished their investigation and found no wrongdoing, but they wanted me to step back from public events for a while. They said it was for everyone's safety, including mine, which made sense, but it still hurt. I'd worked so hard to build up our advocacy program, and now I had to watch from the sidelines. A week later, I got a call from the district attorney's office saying they'd issued David a citation for violating the protective order based on the drive-by incident my neighbor had reported. It was just a fine, but at least there was an official record now. Tom made dinner that night and we tried not to talk about it, but I could tell he was worried. Then the next bombshell hit when Emma texted me a news article about David's case with Marcus. He'd taken a plea deal for 2 years probation and 200 hours of community service. No jail time at all for letting a 4-year-old drown while he got beer. I threw my phone across the room and Tom just held me while I cried. It wasn't my fight anymore, but it still felt wrong. 2 days later, a process server showed up at my door with a subpoena. David's lawyer wanted me to give a deposition in the civil case between David and his brother about Marcus. They wanted me to testify that drownings happen, and parents can't watch kids every second. My lawyer filed a motion right away to limit what they could ask me about. We spent 3 days going back and forth with the court about what was relevant. Finally, the judge ruled they could only ask me about general pool safety and statistics, but nothing about Baxter specifically. My lawyer said it was a partial win, but I still felt sick thinking about sitting across from David's legal team answering questions that would help him avoid responsibility for another dead child. The prep session started the next week at my lawyer's office downtown. My therapist sat on one side of me while my lawyer shuffled through papers on the other side. They made me repeat the same phrase over and over until my voice didn't shake anymore. I don't engage in speculation. We practiced for 3 hours straight that first day. My therapist would pretend to be David's lawyer and ask me trick questions about whether I blamed David for what happened to Marcus. Every time I started to give my real opinion, my lawyer would tap the table hard. Start over. Just facts. No opinions, no feelings. The second session went better, but my therapist kept pushing harder with the questions. She asked if I thought parents who let kids drown should go to jail, asked if I was happy David was suffering, asked if I wanted revenge. Each time I just repeated that I wasn't there to give opinions on legal matters. By the 4th session, I could say it without my hands shaking. The deposition happened 2 weeks later in a conference room that smelled like old coffee and copy paper. David's lawyer was this tall guy with gray hair who kept clicking his pen while he talked. He started easy with basic questions about pool safety statistics. Then he got to the real stuff. Do you believe my client deserves to be punished for an accident? Click, click with the pen. I looked him straight in the eye. Legal consequences aren't for me to determine. He tried again from different angles for 2 hours. Asked if I thought David was a bad person. Asked if I wanted to see him in prison. Asked if I was testifying out of spite. Each time I gave the same type of answer. Just facts about pool safety. Nothing about David specifically. Nothing about what he deserved. My lawyer squeezed my shoulder when we finally left. That night, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was David's cousin saying David wanted to thank me for not making things worse at the deposition. Said David appreciated me being fair. I screenshot it immediately and forwarded it to my lawyer. She called me back within 5 minutes telling me to file a police report right away for the protective order violation. The officer who took my report seemed bored until he saw the protective order paperwork. Then he started typing faster. Said they'd add it to David's file. 3 days later, an envelope arrived from the National Epilepsy Foundation. They wanted me to speak at their annual conference about custody rights and medical discrimination. The letter said they'd seen my work with local support groups and thought my story could help other parents. I sat at my kitchen table staring at that invitation for an hour. The conference was huge with over 2,000 people attending. Media would be there. My name and face would be everywhere. Tom found me still sitting there when he got home from work. He read the letter over my shoulder, then sat down across from me. You should do it, he said. I explained all the reasons it was dangerous. David could find out where I was. His family might show up. The media attention could make everything worse. Tom's face got tight. You can't hide forever. We went back and forth for 20 minutes. How does her brain switch so fast between being scared and being strong? First she's shaking in court, then she's answering questions like a robot in that deposition, then deciding about speaking to thousands of people. I wonder if switching between different versions of herself helps her cope with everything happening. He said I was being paranoid. I said he didn't understand what David was capable of. He said I was letting fear control my life. I said he hadn't lived through what I had. He slammed his hand on the table. Not hard, but enough to make me jump. I'm trying to support you, but you won't let yourself heal. I went to bed without saying goodnight. The next morning, Tom apologized over breakfast. Said he just hated seeing me limit myself because of David. We talked it through more calmly this time. He was right that the work mattered to me. I was right that safety had to come first. We found a middle ground. I called the foundation that afternoon and said I'd speak but with conditions. No personal details in the program, no home city mentioned, security present during my talk. They agreed to everything without hesitation. Said they understood that advocates often faced harassment. The conference was 6 weeks away in Chicago. I spent those weeks working on my presentation, focused on the legal aspects and statistics. Nothing too personal. Tom helped me practice in our living room. The day of the conference, my hands were steady until I walked into the main ballroom. 2,000 chairs set up in perfect rows, giant screens on both sides of the stage. I was the third speaker after lunch. The first 2 talks went by in a blur. Then they called my name and I walked up those stairs on shaky legs. Started my presentation about custody battles and medical discrimination. 5 minutes in, the screens changed to show a memorial slideshow for children lost to seizure-related accidents. The third photo was Baxter's face from the old news coverage. My hands started shaking so bad I could barely hold the microphone. But I kept talking, kept my voice steady even though my throat felt like it was closing. Finished my whole presentation while his picture stayed frozen on those giant screens. People clapped when I finished, but I barely heard them. Just walked off stage and straight to the bathroom where I threw up. Tom held my hair back and didn't say anything. A month later, my lawyer called with news about David's sentencing. Probation as expected. 2 years with mandatory counseling. The no-contact order extended for 5 years past the protective order. She said it wasn't real justice, but at least there was documented accountability. The civil case between David and his brother kept going, though. My deposition transcript became part of discovery. David's brother's lawyer called to warn me I might have to testify at the actual trial. Said it could be another year before trial date. Another year of being connected to this nightmare. The calls started that same week, always from blocked numbers, always late at night. Just breathing for 10 or 15 seconds, then hanging up. The first night I thought it was a wrong number. The second night I knew better. By the 5th night I was jumping every time my phone rang. Changed my number the next day. Updated all my security settings. Made my social media private. Tom installed new locks on our doors even though I didn't ask him to. That same week Tom brought up something we'd talked about before. He was making dinner while I sat at the kitchen table going through mail when he turned around with this serious look on his face and asked if I'd thought more about us getting a place together. My stomach dropped. I loved Tom, but the idea of sharing a home again made my chest tight. I told him I needed more time to feel okay in my own skin first. He nodded and went back to stirring the pasta, but I saw his shoulders drop. Over the next few days, he'd bring it up in small ways like showing me listings on his phone or mentioning how much money we'd save splitting rent. Each time I'd change the subject, and each time his smile got a little smaller. The following Tuesday at my support group, I found myself talking about boundaries without planning to. The words just came out about how people sometimes use your worst moments against you to get what they want, how they make you feel guilty for protecting yourself, how they twist your trauma into a weapon. When I finished talking, the room was quiet for a moment, then people started nodding. After the meeting, 3 different members came up to thank me. One woman said she finally understood why her ex kept bringing up her miscarriage whenever she said no to him. Another guy realized his brother was doing the same thing with his addiction history. They all said it helped them see patterns they'd been blind to. That Sunday morning, Emma picked me up early, and we drove to the cemetery without talking about where we were going. She'd brought white roses from her garden. We walked to Baxter's grave and stood there in the quiet morning air. The grass was wet with dew, and birds were singing in the trees. Emma knelt down and arranged the flowers while I just stood there feeling the weight of everything. The grief was still there, heavy as ever, but it wasn't mixed with David's poison anymore. It was just grief, clean and simple. We stayed for maybe 20 minutes, then walked back to the car without saying anything. Some things don't need words. Monday afternoon, my phone buzzed with an email from my attorney. She'd forwarded something from David's lawyer saying it was an apology letter David had to write for his counseling program. The subject line alone made my hands shake. I saved it to my legal file without opening it. Whatever he had to say didn't deserve space in my head. He'd had his chance to apologize when it mattered. Now it was just paperwork for some court requirement. The protective order was coming up on a year, and my advocate called to schedule a meeting about renewal. We sat in her office for 2 hours going through everything. The blocked number calls that still came sometimes. The times I'd seen his car near places I went regularly, even though he lived across town. The messages he'd sent through mutual friends asking them to check on me. She helped me organize dates and times and print out phone records. The harassment had gotten sneakier, but the pattern was still there. She said we had more than enough for an extension. The renewal hearing was 3 weeks later. I sat in the courtroom while the judge read through everything. David wasn't there, but his lawyer argued that he'd moved on and didn't need the order anymore. The judge asked why David was still trying to contact me through third parties if he'd moved on. The lawyer didn't have a good answer for that. The judge renewed the order for another year and added some extra conditions about the third-party contact. Walking out of that courthouse felt like I could breathe a little easier. A month later, I signed a lease on my own place. It was small, just a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of an old building, but it was mine. Tom helped me move boxes up the stairs and set up furniture, but he understood when I said I needed to do the decorating myself. He kissed me goodbye at the door that first night and I locked it behind him. 3 locks, all mine. I spent that whole first week just existing in my own space, making coffee when I wanted, leaving dishes in the sink without guilt, watching whatever I wanted on TV, having my own routine that nobody else controlled. It felt like finding pieces of myself I'd forgotten existed. 6 months after moving in, I drove to the community center and parked outside the pool area. Summer was in full swing and families were everywhere. Kids splashing and parents watching from chairs. I bought a bottle of water from the vending machine and sat on the bleachers. My heart was pounding and my hands were sweaty, but I made myself stay. 5 minutes watching children play in the shallow end while their parents sat nearby. 5 minutes of chlorine smell and echoing laughter and bright sunshine on blue water. Then I stood up and walked back to my car because I wanted to leave, not because fear was making me run. Small victory, but still a victory. Thanks for sticking with me through all these questions and wondering moments. It's really been quite the journey exploring together. Take care out there. Like the video, it helps more than you think.